Hey friends, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today we're looking at Cirque's new Surfer's Crush collection, as well as 3 of their returning jellies and some dried florals and rhinestones for nail art. So as you probably saw, this is going to be a pretty massive video because I have a ton of comparisons and I will save my thoughts for the end, but for now, let's just get into the swatches. The first shade in the collection is Bird of Paradise, and this is described as a bright coral with green gold shimmer. So obviously head on, you're gonna see just the gold shimmer, but the green would come through in more extreme angles. So formula-wise, this one was really full coverage on the first coat. It's definitely more of a crelly type of formula and not super sheer. I ended up getting pretty even coverage, but as you saw, I sort of pulled away some of the polish at that lower right-hand corner of my nail. But other than that, I was really surprised with the coverage on this one. The second coat definitely gave me nearly full opacity. I think in certain angles or lighting I could still see through to my nail line, but it didn't really bother me enough to do a third coat, and I really don't think most people would need a third coat for this polish specifically. But yeah, I absolutely adore this one. It's definitely picking up a little bit more orangey than coral. There's a slight pink tint to it, but this is definitely my favorite. Next up we have Shaka, and this is a rich yellow with color shifting red, green, and gold aurora shimmer. But again, you're pretty much gonna see the one color head on because of my lighting, and the other colors will kind of shift through depending on the extreme angles of light that you'll get. So this is definitely more of a jelly type of formula, maybe a little bit on the jelly crelly side because it does build up a little bit, but here on the first coat you can definitely see through to my nail line, but it does give me pretty even coverage. On the second coat it does build up really nicely, but again, still pretty much see through straight to my nail line and even the half moon on my nail. So if you're not a fan of jelly nails or any kind of super sheer polish, this shade probably isn't going to be for you, because even on the third coat I feel like you could still see through to my nail line, though it was almost covered up. I would say maybe like 80% opaque. So I definitely don't mind that, again, especially for a more summery kind of shade. And aside from that, I think the yellow might not be my favorite, but I do love the shimmer and hollow. Up next we have Mermaid Grotto, and this is a minty green with color shifting blue, purple, and red shimmer, but obviously the blue is what you see head on. So I think I would also call this a little bit more of a jade green, or maybe like a sea foam. I don't know if minty really is the right shade that I would describe this, but it could also just be the context of a summery surfer collection that doesn't give me mint vibes. But either way, formula-wise, this one was just as smooth to apply as the other shades and very self-leveling. On the second coat, it did give me pretty decent coverage. You still could see through to my nail line a little bit, but I think most people could get away with wearing 2 coats, assuming you don't mind seeing a little bit of nail line, of course. But I think it looks really nice for the summer because, again, this one is a little bit more on the crelly side, similar to Bird of Paradise. But I ended up building this shade up into 3 coats just to make it a little bit more opaque. And similar to Bird of Paradise, it's not 100% opaque, but definitely close enough that I don't think you would need another coat, for example. So even though I think this shade is so pretty, like I love the shade of green, obviously love the mermaid vibes, I just wish the shimmer was a little bit more vibrant. I feel like it doesn't stand out as much. Up next we have Wipeout, which is an ocean blue with color shifting blue, green, and violet aurora shimmer. So this one, finish-wise, is a little bit more similar to Shaka, which is more of that jelly, crelly kind of consistency. So on the first coat, you can see just how sheer it is, but there is so much shimmer in this. I think it is so pretty. This is probably another favorite in the collection. and I think it looks really nice in one coat. It's not the most even coverage, which, you know, probably is due to the skinny brush, but if it had a wide brush, I think it could work over like a nice sheer color. But obviously I am going to be building this up, and I just built it up in 2 coats because it was opaque enough for me, where I would say maybe this was like 90% opaque. You can definitely still see through to my nail line in certain angles, but I think the shimmer in this one is definitely more distracting, and obviously it's a little bit of a deeper base color. Up next we have Ohana, and this is a lavender with color shifting turquoise and violet shimmer. And of course that little delicate holographic sparkle. I don't even think I mentioned that before, but it is so pretty in all of these polishes. So this one is more on the crelly, buildable side of the formula, similar to Mermaid Grotto and Bird of Paradise. So I feel like most people can get away with 2 coats of this shade. Obviously the first coat is pretty sheer, you could still see through to my nail line, but pretty even coverage for the most part. And the shimmer is so pretty. On the second coat here, you can see it does build up really nicely. Something else I didn't think I mentioned is that sometimes if you grab too much of the polish, you can see it starts to get a little bit brush strokey. So I ended up wiping some of the polish off of my brush to just go back in and sort of straighten out the brush strokes as much as possible, but they do diffuse a bit, so it's not super streaky like a pearlescent finish, for example. Even though this one's a little bit more of a softer, subtle shade, I think it's so pretty. And rounding out the collection, we have Pele, a rich magenta pink with color shifting blue, green, and violet aurora shimmer. So this one is more similar to that jelly, almost crelly consistency like Shaka and Wipeout. But on the first coat, you can see that this one builds up really nicely. It's like the most opaque or even coverage of the jelly side of formulas. So I absolutely love this one, to probably no one's surprise. I just love hot pink nails, especially in the summer. And this one just applied so evenly that I think you really could get away with this in 1 coat. But I am building it up in 2 just to show you how opaque it can get. Similar to the other shades in the collection, this one isn't going to be fully opaque, but it's definitely opaque enough for me, and I think for most people. I really don't see it necessary to do a 3rd coat for a shade like this, but obviously that's because I don't mind a squishy look. And yeah, this one is gorgeous. Now for the returning jellies, the first one that we have is Aqua Jelly, which is a cyan blue jelly. So I feel like this one is pretty much like a perfect light sky blue kind of shade. I think it's so perfect that they brought this back, especially for the summertime, because we definitely needed a blue like this in Cirque's lineup. And these were previously released jellies. This one I believe was from the Sea Glass set, which again, definitely perfect to go along with this collection. So obviously the skinny brush isn't the most ideal way to apply jelly polishes, but I think the good thing about Cirque's jellies is that they are very easy to work with and very self-leveling. So even though that first coat you saw I was kind of struggling with because I didn't grab enough polish on the brush initially, it still looked really even by the time I was finished with that first coat. So here on 2 coats, you can see it does build up, but you could still see through to my nail line a pretty decent amount. So I did do a 3rd coat and a little bit of a thicker 3rd coat, I think. And it does give you more of that slightly squishy, crelly look. So again, totally not 100% opaque with polishes like these, but it does build up pretty nicely. So I am just very excited about this one. It's probably my favorite jelly that's come back so far. Next we have Lime Jelly, which is also from the previously released Sea Glass collection. And this is a bright lime green jelly. So I'm also really happy about this one because we just needed a green like this in Cirque's jelly catalog. So I'm so happy that they brought this one back. Formula wise, it was pretty much the same experience as the last shade. This time I did grab a little bit more polish, so I didn't have to dip back into the bottle as much for that first coat, but it still wasn't totally even, obviously not anywhere near opaque, but I still think it looked pretty nice in just 2 coats. Obviously, the whole purpose of jellies is to be intentionally sheer, so that way you can layer flakies or glitters, or even just layer jellies with other jellies. So that way you can create like a sea glass kind of look, which is what I did over on my Instagram. And I just absolutely love layering jellies so much. So here it is built up on 3 coats. You can see it's still not 100% opaque, but it does build up really nicely and it's so bright. But speaking of bright, the last returning jelly we have is Cobalt Jelly from the Shibori set. And this is a true cobalt or an Yves Klein blue. And this one definitely can build up to be very bright, which I love, but the process to get there I don't love as much. As you can see here on the first coat, it is definitely the most sheer and most jelly of all of the polishes we've seen so far. So I didn't get even coverage at all. It's very splotchy looking with a few dark spots and light spots mixed throughout. Obviously, I think if you had a wide brush, it would make application for this shade specifically a lot easier and better, but either way, it's still going to be a very sheer kind of shade. So here on 2 coats, you can still see right through to my nail line. So this is definitely a very true jelly type of formula. I mentioned it before, I think in my spring favorites video when I shared a few spring jellies from Cirque that I love. Those are usually a little bit more on the crelly side of a jelly where it's very buildable, similar to the last 2 shades. This one is like glass. I feel like the color builds up very beautifully on 3 coats. It was even coverage for me, but you can see right through to my nail line. So definitely not a buildable shade. We also have these Floral Reef dried flowers that are launching alongside the collection, and Cirque has released a set of dried flowers before, but they were a lot smaller than these. So these are definitely cute, but I just don't love that there's only like 2 or 3 of each of them. And some of these are just absolutely massive. Like even on my long nails, they are so big, but yeah, I'm kind of conflicted about these. And lastly, we have the Rainbow Fish Rhinestones, which are these really colorful half sphere kind of shaped charms that are super cute. Now moving on to comparisons, we're starting with Bird of Paradise and comparing it to Cirque's Fandango, which is one of my favorite shades, as I recently shared in my spring favorites. So this is definitely a very similar vibe, but not dupes at all. A closer shade that I ended up having in my collection was Different Dimensions Peachy Keen, which I also shared as one of my favorites from last summer. And these definitely look really similar in the bottle, but on the nail is where you can see those differences. So no dupes here because Fandango is way too sheer and the gold is also a lot stronger than in Bird of Paradise. And Peachy Keen, again, even though super similar in the bottle, it just has a much darker base color. I just have some bottle comparisons for Shaka, starting with Mooncat's Yellow Submarine, which is a very different formula. That one is more of a true jelly with these red to orange iridescent flakies, but they're very similar color-wise, if that makes sense. And I also wanted to show it next to Mooncat's Demeter's Harvest, which is more of a similar shimmery type of crelly shade, but the shimmer is a very different color in both of these. I also don't have anything like Mermaid Grotto in my collection, so I wanted to show it next to Mooncat's Earth to Gaia because that one is described as like a jade green base, but it's a little bit more blue or teal with a very different shimmer color as well. Next up for Wipeout, I had to show it next to Cirque's Nocturne, which is a somewhat similar kind of shade as far as a blue with blue shimmer and the little hollow, but the base is a little bit more dusty. And I'm also going to be showing it next to Heart of Glass from the Cirque Discotheque collection last year because that is another finish that is similar to Wipeout, but I think as you can see, Heart of Glass has a much more intense and vibrant shimmer. So on the nail, you can tell that they are pretty different. I think the closest is Nocturne, but you can see the base is a little bit more of a dusty periwinkle maybe, and a little bit more opaque as well. The shimmer in Wipeout is a little stronger, kind of similar to Heart of Glass, but that one's totally different, so no dupes. So I thought that maybe Mooncat's Mercury's Tears would be more of a dupe because it's another ocean blue with a really pretty shifting shimmer. But as you can see, the bases might be a little bit similar. Maybe Mooncat is a little bit more on the cobalt blue side, but the shimmer alone is super different where it shifts from gold to pink. Next up for Ohana, we have Cirque's Isle of Capri, which is another very suspiciously similar kind of shade, as far as being a light purple with a blue shimmer and of course that delicate hollow sparkle. And I'm also going to be showing it next to Mooncat's Poisonberry from the recent Lost in a Folktale collection. This definitely has a much more similar base color, but the shimmer is very different where it's more of that brighter pinkish purple in Mooncat. So on the nail, you can see that once they are built up, Isle of Capri ends up being a little bit darker and dustier, but the shimmer and hollow is still the same. And then for Mooncat, the shimmer is really intense and stands out a lot more, I think, and it has an almost pearlescent kind of finish. Next up for Pele, we have Cirque's Wildberry West, which is another very similar kind of hot pink, more fuchsia leaning base with that intense shimmer and holographic sparkle, but you can see it's a little bit different just from this shimmer alone. And I also have Say Chic from Cirque, which is another favorite of mine, and this one is more of a brighter hot pink with a lighter pink shimmer, but that same holographic sparkle. So even though they definitely can look very similar in the bottle among all three of them, there's a slight gradient effect to these where Wildberry West is definitely a lot darker and more purple leaning with a intense blue shift, and Say Chic is more bright and almost like a spring kind of pink with Pele right in the middle. So before showing comparisons of the returning jellies, I wanted to show the skittle that I did on my other hand. So I have Cobalt Jelly on my pinky, then Aqua Jelly on my middle finger, and Lime Jelly on my thumb, 2 coats of each. And then on my ring finger, I have a layer of Cobalt Jelly topped with Aqua Jelly, and then my pointer is a layer of Aqua Jelly topped with Lime Jelly, which created the perfect gradient skittle. So starting with Aqua Jelly, I wanted to quickly show it next to Morningtide, which absolutely adore the shade, but it is much more of a periwinkle blue kind of jelly, and Aqua Jelly is like that perfect sky blue. So it kind of reminded me of Mooncat's Acidwashed from their Kaleidoscope Haze collection, which I absolutely adore, but that one is even more of a brighter sky blue, if that makes sense. So I thought it would still be fun to try and recreate it using Cirque's Fantasia from the thermal collection that we don't talk about anymore. And I did 1 coat of Fantasia in between layers of Aqua Jelly. So it does give a very similar effect. I feel like the flakies are definitely the same, but again, Aqua Jelly is just a little bit darker compared to how light and washed out Acidwashed is. Next for Lime Jelly, I wanted to show it next to Jade Jelly because this is another fan favorite, I think. It's definitely another one of my favorite greens. You can see how much it's used, but it is definitely more muted and obviously jade in comparison to how bright lime is. And here it is next to Mooncat's Best Bud from the Kaleidoscope Haze collection, but that one is a little bit more of a slightly like yellow leaning green jelly base. So I thought in order to recreate it, maybe it'd be better to use Blaze Glaze, which recently came out in Cirque's Dank Duo. And this one is more of a chartreuse jelly kind of base. So it's a little bit more yellow compared to the Mooncat shade with more of a metallic flake as opposed to an iridescent flaky. So definitely not as much of an accurate recreation. I think if I didn't do a layer of lime jelly over Blaze Glaze, maybe it would have looked closer as far as the base colors, but again, the flakies are the biggest difference. And then lastly, for Cobalt Jelly, I wanted to show this next to Cirque's Navy Jelly, which came out a couple of summers ago, and you can see it's a very, very dusty, darker blue jelly. So obviously I'm going to be trying to recreate Mooncat's Cosmic Cowboy, which definitely has a similar base color, but it's not as bright or intense as Cobalt Jelly, but still very, very close. So I ended up sandwiching a coat of Holotaco's Cosmic Unicorn skin in between the Cobalt Jelly, and I would say this is the closest recreation that I've done so far. The flakies look the same to me. It's really just that Mooncat's base color is a little lighter, but I noticed that it's almost the exact same as what I had on my ring finger, which is Aqua Jelly over Cobalt Jelly. So I think if you did that order with the Cosmic Unicorn skin in the middle, you would have the perfect recreation. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for Cirque's new Surfer's Crush collection. As always, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this absolutely massive release today, because we also have the returning jellies and then a couple of new nail art accessories. So let me know what you're feeling or not feeling with this launch. But I am a huge fan. I mean, I absolutely love this particular shimmery sheer finish from Cirque. I feel like they do that formula so well. It's like one of their best finishes in their whole lineup, in my opinion. So I'm really happy to see them bring it back, because it's been a while since they've released any shade with this specific finish. I know they had a few in the holiday collection, but those were like a little bit more of the pearlescent kind because of the white base. But I'm excited about these, because even though half of them are that shimmery sheer like Huga or Fandango or Succulent Garden, for example, the other half are kind of like from the Discotheque collection. So they're like more of that jelly, aurora shifting kind of shimmer. Just so beautiful, and I'm just really happy about this lineup. The returning jellies, I think I'm also a huge fan of, because I just love jellies to begin with. And these are just so fun for the summer, especially for that like sea glass effect. I mean, I don't have my thumb done here, but they're so fun to layer with. And I just love that they brought these back. I'm still crossing my fingers that they are going to bring back the amethyst set and the tortoise set, especially for later in the year. But I'm really happy with these. The only gripe that I have with this launch really is with the dried florals, because I just think some of them are like way too big, and then there's just not enough of the other ones. Like the small ones are beautiful, but there's only 2 of like each kind, and I don't really think you'd be able to reuse them after like top coating them and wearing them. Like, I imagine once you're going to remove them, the acetone is just kind of gonna eat away at the flowers. So it kind of sucks that there's not as many of them, but I love how they look and obviously love the concept in general. So you'll have to let me know any and all thoughts that you have regarding this launch down below in the comments so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.